Something has changed, and most people did not notice it because the change did not arrive as a dramatic event. There was no big speech that told ordinary people their financial lives had become more exposed. There was no warning light on the dashboard. There was no moment when someone sat retirees down and said, "The rules you thought you understood are not the rules operating inside the banking system anymore." That is why this matters. Over a relatively short period, the system around the $10,000 bank reporting rule has become broader, faster, more automated, and less forgiving. It has become the kind of system that can catch an honest person not because that person is doing something wrong, but because the pattern of the transaction looks wrong to a machine, to a compliance department, or to a set of rules that were written for a very different world. That is the principle I want you to understand. First, most people think risk comes from bad intent. They think if they are honest, careful, and responsible, the system will naturally treat them as honest, careful, and responsible. But systems do not work that way. Systems operate according to incentives. Rules, thresholds, databases, liability fears, and automated triggers. When those forces change, your behavior has to change too. This is not a warning about a possible future rule that may arrive someday. It is a warning about a set of conditions that is already in place. It is showing up in bank branches, payment apps, business filings, tax reporting systems, and compliance reviews. It is affecting people who have done nothing more dramatic than withdraw money, sell something, help a child, pay a contractor, or move funds they earned over a lifetime. The dangerous part is that most people over 60 were taught an older version of the rule. They were taught that $10,000 was the important line. They were taught that the bank simply filed a report when cash crossed that line. They were taught that ordinary lawful activity would not be a problem. And in a simpler world, that mental model may have been close enough. But the world has changed. The banking system is now more automated. The tax reporting system is more connected. Digital payments are no longer off to the side. Elder fraud rules have given banks a strong reason to delay suspicious withdrawals. Structuring rules have become more sensitive to patterns. Business reporting penalties have become more serious. And the original $10,000 threshold, the number at the center of this entire machine, has not been meaningfully adjusted to reflect the world people actually live in now. So the problem is not just the rule. The problem is the mismatch between an old threshold and a modern financial life. I want to explain this in the same way I would analyze any system. First, look at the underlying cause, then look at the incentives, then look at the feedback loops, then look at the behaviors that create risk, and then only after that, look at the practical moves that reduce the risk. Because when you understand the machine, you stop being surprised by it. Before we go through the changes, I want to begin with a simple story because stories show the system more clearly than abstract rules do. Imagine a retired couple. I will call them Martin and Carol. Martin is 71, Carol is 68. They live a normal life outside Phoenix. They are not speculators, they are not criminals, they are not moving money through shell companies or hiding anything offshore. Martin spent decades working in a steady business. Carol worked for years as a nurse. They saved, they paid their bills, and they tried to make conservative decisions. One autumn, they decided to replace Carol's car. They did what many people from their generation were taught to do. They negotiated the price, wanted to avoid financing costs, and planned to pay in cash. The total was a little more than $40,000. It was a large amount, but not a strange amount in the modern world. A reliable car can cost that much. A medical bill can cost that much. A home repair can cost that much. So Martin went to the bank. He filled out the withdrawal slip. He expected a routine transaction instead. The system treated the request as an event. A manager came out and asked him to step into a private office. The questions began. Why did he need the cash? Had someone told him to withdraw it? Had he received a call message or email asking him to send money? Had he met anyone recently online? Was anyone pressuring him? Now, on one level, those are reasonable questions. Fraud against older people is real. It is a serious problem. If a bank can prevent a retiree from losing life savings to a scammer, that is good. But every good rule creates a second-order consequence. The same rule that can protect someone from a fraudster can also delay an honest person from using his own money. The same bank employee who wants to protect a customer is also operating inside a liability system. If the bank releases money and it turns out to be fraud, the bank can face blame. If the bank delays the money and the customer is annoyed, the bank usually faces little downside. That incentive matters. So Martin was not simply talking to a bank manager. He was dealing with a system whose safest decision was to freeze first and explain later. After he answered the questions and showed the transaction was legitimate, The bank still delayed the withdrawal. The car dealer had to hold the car. Martin and Carol had to wait. The money was theirs, but access to it was controlled by a review process. Then another consequence arrived. A suspicious activity report was filed on the transaction. Martin had not committed a crime. He had not attempted to evade anything. He had not been part of a scam. But the transaction entered a reporting system and stayed there as part of a record that could be compared against future behavior. That is what happens when a normal life collides with a modern compliance machine. And if you are over 60, or if you help someone who is over 60, you need to understand that this is not about whether you are a good person. It is about whether your financial behavior appears normal to the system watching it. The deeper cause begins with a number that has been frozen for more than half a century. The $10,000 reporting threshold comes from a very different America. When that number was written into law, $10,000 was not an ordinary amount of money. It was large relative to wages, housing, cars, and everyday prices. In that world, a $10,000 cash transaction stood out. Today, the number has lost much of its original meaning. A car can cross $10,000 easily. A roof repair can cross it. A medical expense can cross it. A gift to family can cross it. A home improvement project can cross it. A legal retainer can cross it. A transfer related to retirement, inheritance, insurance, or the sale of property can cross it. The threshold stayed fixed while life moved upward around it. That is how a rule originally aimed at unusual transactions begins to touch ordinary transactions. It is not always because lawmakers actively made one new giant change. Sometimes the biggest changes happen when a number does not move while the world around it does. That is a principle worth remembering. A frozen threshold plus inflation becomes a hidden tax on normal behavior. It becomes a hidden trigger. It quietly expands the reach of the rule without anyone having to announce that expansion. If that $10,000 line had adjusted over time the way many other government numbers adjust, the normal transaction of a modern retiree would not look nearly as unusual. But it did not adjust. So every year, more ordinary transactions cross the line. Every year, more retirees trip systems they were never trained to think about. Every year, the gap between what people believe the rule is and how the rule functions becomes wider. That is the base layer. Now let me walk through the main changes around that base layer, because this is where the practical risk appears. The first change is the withdrawal delay connected to senior protection rules. The intention behind these rules is understandable. Older people are targeted by scammers. They are pressured by fake emergencies, fake romantic relationships, fake government threats, fake investments, and family manipulation. Banks see these losses. Regulators see these losses. So the system gives banks tools to slow suspicious transactions when they believe a senior may be exploited. But the key word is believes. A bank does not need perfect proof. It does not need to know the transaction is fraudulent. It needs a reasonable suspicion. And in the modern banking environment, reasonable suspicion can begin with a deviation from your normal pattern. If you normally withdraw a few $100s at a time and suddenly ask for $10,000, $20,000, or $40,000, the software may flag it. If your account has been quiet and then large money begins to move, it may be reviewed. If the withdrawal is unusual for your history, the system may ask why. That is not necessarily because a person at the bank thinks you are foolish. It is because the system has been trained to look for abnormal patterns. And abnormal does not mean illegal. Abnormal simply means different from your historical behavior. That is what many retirees do not understand. They think, I have banked here for 40 years, they know me. But in a large modern institution, your personal reputation is not the only thing that matters. The pattern matters, the software matters, the compliance file matters, the bank's fear of liability matters. If the bank delays the transaction, the delay can disrupt your real life. It can affect a car purchase, a medical payment, a family need, or a contractor schedule, and in many cases, the bank may not explain the full reason clearly. It may call the delay a processing issue or a compliance review. The result is the same. Your money does not move when you expected it to move. This is a classic example of a good protective intention creating an access risk. The second change is the structuring trap. This is one of the most dangerous areas because the behavior that creates the risk often feels sensible to ordinary people. Many people think if $10,000 creates a report, I will just move less than $10,000 at a time. They think they are being prudent. They think they are avoiding hassle. They think smaller transactions are safer. In the eyes of the law, that can be exactly the wrong move. If a person breaks deposits or withdrawals into smaller amounts for the purpose of avoiding the reporting requirement, that can be treated as structuring. And the key problem is that the money itself does not have to be dirty for the pattern to create legal danger. This is the part people miss. The source of the money can be completely legitimate. It can come from retirement income, a home sale, a business, an inheritance, an insurance payment, or savings. The transaction can have a lawful purpose. But if the pattern suggests that the person intentionally stayed below a reporting threshold, the structure itself becomes the problem. That is a very important distinction. Most people judge themselves by intent. The system often begins by judging patterns. In the past, the most obvious examples were repeated deposits very close to $10,000. A person making repeated $9,000 or $9,500 transactions was easy to spot, but modern pattern recognition is more sensitive. It can look at amounts further below the threshold. It can look at frequency. It can look at timing. It can look at whether the spacing of transactions appears designed. You may think you are being cautious. The system may think you are avoiding a report. And once a pattern is flagged, the consequences can escalate. There can be a human review. There can be a suspicious activity report. There can be inquiry by tax or financial enforcement units. In severe cases, asset forfeiture can become part of the process. Civil forfeiture is especially important to understand because it changes the psychology of the risk. In a normal criminal case, people think the government must prove guilt before taking punishment. But in civil forfeiture, the money itself can become the target. That means innocent people can find themselves having to fight to recover funds even when no criminal charge was ever filed. There have been real cases in which ordinary businesses lost access to money because their deposit patterns looked like structuring. Grocery stores, farmers, convenience store operators, and other lawful businesses have been caught in this kind of net. The lesson is not that everyone will face that outcome. The lesson is that pattern risk is real, and retirees can create pattern risk accidentally. They may split payments because they are nervous. They may make smaller deposits because they do not want attention. They may take money out gradually because that is how they feel comfortable. But if the reason for the smaller amounts is to avoid a report, that is exactly the behavior the system is designed to detect. The principle is simple. Do not create a suspicious pattern in an attempt to avoid a routine report. A routine report is usually not the enemy. A pattern that looks like evasion is the enemy. The third change is that digital payments are no longer outside the system in the way many people still imagine for a long time. People mentally separated banks from digital payment apps and crypto exchanges. They thought of cash rules as one category and electronic peer transfers as another. That separation has narrowed. Crypto platforms, digital payment systems, payment processors, and peer-to-peer apps are increasingly connected to reporting systems. Transactions that used to feel informal can now create tax records or compliance trails, a reimbursement. A sale of personal property, a transfer to a family member, or side income can all become part of a reporting environment. This is where many normal people get surprised. They think, my grandchild sent me money through an app. My neighbor paid me for something I sold. My church reimbursed me. My friend sent money back for dinner. None of that feels like a business. None of it feels like a reportable event, but the system does not always understand your personal context. It sees amounts, flows, account identities, categories, and thresholds. If enough money moves through a platform, the platform may issue a form. If a larger transfer moves in a way that resembles a reportable transaction, it may enter a compliance pipeline if personal and business like activity are mixed in one place. Sorting it out later can become difficult. Again, the principle is not that every digital payment is dangerous. The principle is that convenience creates record trails. When something is easy, people use it casually. When people use it casually, they mix purposes. When they mix purposes, the reporting system can treat the aggregate as something different from what they intended. That is how a harmless habit becomes tax confusion. The fourth change is the increased pressure on businesses to report large payments. This is connected to Form 8300, which businesses must file when they receive more than $10,000 in cash or certain cash-like instruments in a transaction or related transactions. The important point is not only that the form exists, it is that businesses now have stronger incentives to file accurately and promptly because penalties for failing to do so can be costly. That shifts behavior if you pay a car dealer, contractor, attorney, jeweler, or other business in a way that triggers the rule. The business is not going to protect your privacy by pretending the transaction did not happen. The business has its own risk. It has its own compliance burden. it has its own penalties. So it will report what it is required to report. That means your transaction can create a record from the other side, even if you never personally file anything. This is important because people often think only about their own bank. They forget that the recipient may also have a reporting obligation. A contractor, dealer, lawyer, or other business may need your identifying information and the nature of the transaction. That report may go directly into the tax and financial reporting environment. The related transaction rule is especially important. If you pay $6,000 today and $6,000 next week for the same job, the system may treat that as one $12,000 transaction. Splitting the payment does not necessarily avoid reporting. It may create more questions, especially if the split appears designed around the threshold. This is another example of the same principle. Trying to avoid a normal report can create an abnormal pattern. The fifth change is not really a new rule at all. It is the inflation cascade. This is the slowest and most powerful force in the whole story. Most people underestimate slow forces because they do not feel dramatic while they are happening. Debt cycles build slowly until they break suddenly. Asset bubbles build slowly until people decide they were obvious. Inflation changes life gradually until thresholds that once made sense become traps. The $10,000 line is one of those thresholds. A normal retiree today can cross it many times without doing anything unusual. A car purchase crosses it, a roof crosses it, a medical bill crosses it, a grandchild wedding gift may cross it, a home sale or insurance payout can cross it. A distribution, transfer, refund, or savings movement can cross it. The system sees more events. The retiree experiences ordinary life. That gap is the risk. When an old rule meets a modern price level, normal behavior starts looking more reportable. And when reporting becomes more automated, more connected, and more sensitive, the number of moments when an ordinary person can be flagged goes up. That is the full picture: a frozen threshold, stronger senior protection delays, more sensitive structuring detection, digital payment reporting, greater business filing pressure, more routine transactions crossing the line because of inflation. Now, the purpose of understanding risk is not to become afraid. Fear by itself is useless. The purpose is to convert risk into principles and action. So let me explain the protection moves. The first protection move is to pre-notify your bank before a large transaction. This is simple, but it changes the pattern from surprise to explanation. If you know you will withdraw, deposit, or transfer a meaningful amount of money, especially if it is outside your normal behavior, call the branch ahead of time, speak with a manager if possible. Explain the transaction. Ask that a note be placed in your customer file. The note does not erase legal reporting requirements. If a report must be filed, it will still be filed. But it gives the bank context before the compliance system treats the activity as unexplained. It reduces the chance that a human reviewer sees only an unusual amount with no story attached. Systems make worse decisions when they lack context. Your job is to provide context before the system asks for it. The second protection move is to stop accidentally structuring. If you need to move $12,000, the cleaner approach is often to move $12,000 openly and let any routine report happen. What you do not want to do is break the transaction into smaller pieces because you are trying to stay under a line. That is the dangerous behavior. People dislike reports because they imagine reports automatically mean trouble. Usually a routine report is just a record. It may never affect your life, but a pattern that looks like avoidance can create a much larger problem than the report would have created. So the principle is this: do not let fear of paperwork cause you to create a pattern that looks like evasion. If there is a legitimate business reason to split a payment, document it. If a contractor is paid in stages because work is completed in stages, write that down. If money arrives in parts because the underlying source arrives in parts, keep the record. The reason matters, the timing matters, the documentation matters. The third protection move is to use wires or direct transfers instead of physical cash when moving large amounts. Physical cash is where many of the old reporting thresholds and suspicion patterns are most sensitive. Cash is hard to trace. Cash creates handling problems. Cash creates business reporting burdens. Cash creates questions. A wire transfer leaves a cleaner institutional trail. If you are buying a car, paying a contractor, sending money to a legitimate business, or moving funds for a large purpose, ask whether a direct wire is possible. Many businesses prefer it. It can reduce cash handling risk. It can reduce confusion. It can make the transaction's purpose easier to document. This does not mean wires are invisible. They are not. It means they are often cleaner, more explainable, and less likely to look like an unexplained pile of cash moving through the system. In risk management, cleaner is better than clever. The fourth protection move is to separate digital payment accounts by purpose. This is a simple operational discipline. Do not mix personal reimbursements, family transfers, casual sales, and side income in one messy digital stream if you can avoid it. If one account receives dinner reimbursements, family money, hobby sales, small business payments, and random transfers, then at tax time you have to untangle a pile of mixed signals. Separate purposes create clearer records. One account can be used for personal reimbursements, another can be used for activity that has any business or income, like character. The point is not to hide anything. The point is to create clean categories so that when forms are issued or questions arise, you can explain what happened. Most people create avoidable problems because they do not design their financial plumbing. They let convenience design it for them. The fifth protection move is to build a documentation habit before you need one. This is the least exciting move and one of the most powerful. For any meaningful transaction, write down the basic facts, the date, the amount, the source of the funds, the recipient, the purpose, keep receipts, keep invoices, keep bank confirmations, keep messages that explain why money moved. You do not need a complicated system. A notebook is better than memory. A spreadsheet is better than a pile of paper. A folder with confirmations is better than trying to reconstruct facts under stress. The reason documentation matters is that the system sees patterns first and explanations. Second, if you have contemporaneous records, you can explain the pattern. If you do not, you are asking a reviewer to believe your memory after the fact. That is not a position you want to be in. There is also an additional move for older customers that is worth understanding. You can speak with your bank about setting up a trusted contact and documenting common transaction types that should not automatically be treated as suspicious. Different banks may call this by different names, and the exact process will vary. But the principle is the same. You want the bank to know in advance what normal looks like for you. If you expect to make family gifts, medical payments, car purchases, home improvement payments, or other large ordinary retirement transactions, tell the bank, ask what senior protection forms, trusted contact procedures, or customer notes they can place on file. Ask how they handle elder exploitation reviews. Ask who is contacted before a transaction is delayed. This is not about giving up control. It is about reducing the chance that the bank interprets your normal life as an emergency. The best time to build that arrangement is before you need the money. The worst time is while a transaction is already frozen and everyone is operating under pressure. Think of it like an emergency plan. You do not design an emergency plan during the emergency. You design it in advance so that when stress arrives, the system already knows what to do. Now let me close with the most important principle. The $10,000 rule is not becoming simpler. It is not becoming easier for older people to understand. It is not automatically adjusting itself to reflect modern prices. The system is becoming more connected, more automated, and more willing to treat unusual patterns as signals. That does not mean you should be paranoid, it means you should be prepared. There's a big difference between fear and preparation. Fear says, the system is dangerous, so I will avoid thinking about it. Preparation says the system has rules, incentives, and thresholds. So I will understand them and act with discipline. If you are retired, near retirement, or helping an older parent manage money, the old casual approach is no longer enough. Walking into a bank with a large withdrawal and assuming everyone will understand may not be enough. Splitting transactions because it feels safer may be dangerous. Mixing digital payment purposes can create confusion. Paying large amounts in cash can create reporting burdens. Failing to document can turn an innocent pattern into a difficult explanation. The solution is not complicated. Notify before large moves. Do not split transactions to avoid reports. Use clean transfer methods when possible. Keep digital payment streams organized. Document meaningful money movement. Ask your bank how it handles senior protection reviews. Put trusted contacts and common transaction explanations in place before trouble starts. Those actions do not make you invisible. They make you understandable. And in a system that increasingly relies on automated suspicion, being understandable is a major advantage. The people who will suffer the most are not necessarily the people who did something wrong. Often, they are the people who did something ordinary in a way the system did not understand. They waited until the last minute. They moved money in pieces. They used cash because that was how they always did it. They mixed personal and income. Like payments, they kept no notes. They assumed a clean conscience would be enough. A clean conscience is important, but in a modern financial system, a clean record is what proves it. So before the next time you move a meaningful amount of money, take the simple steps now. Speak to your bank, create the paper trail, understand the thresholds, keep your purposes clean, make the transaction easy to explain before anyone asks you to explain it. That is how you reduce risk. That is how you protect access to your own money. And that is how you adapt when an old rule becomes a modern trap. Not by panicking, not by hiding, not by trying to outsmart the system, but by understanding how the system works and moving through it with clarity, discipline, and preparation.